So, Hiram Rivera runs cover for Zionist China on millennials are killing capitalism.
Begins a process of ultimately beating the great Satan that is the United States of America. And for the bombs to stop dropping on their land, in their country, they must meet that violence, as Fanon and Wretched the Earth said, with greater violence. As these so-called movement leaders and so-called socialist organizations misuse Frantz Fanon's words, go up and down the street quoting Amilcar Cabral, making references to Malcolm, to then push and justify voting for Kamala Harris or voting in general. In a gross example of opportunism and counter-revolution, we have examples, real-life examples now, of people who understand that materially, right, that this is a fight against imperialism. And we're willing to wage that fight. And if this is the battlefield that we're fighting, then we will do that to the death, because violence is coming no matter what. The destruction of this planet under capitalism is inevitable if we allow it.
So look how he's using talking points that are correct to set up for his Chinese grift, because he's going to sell out to China in this video. Spoiler alert, right?
Right, and so in that moment, now we move from what we see is the crushing of black revolutionary organizations, of black revolutionary movement that could take this country into a completely different strata. Is continuously beaten back and beaten back and beaten down, because we don't create the necessary organizations and institutions to be able to fight back and win that, because it's going to be a fight.
So he's using revolutionary language to set up his big old Chinese grift.
And it's going to have to be a fight. And we're going to have to make sacrifices. Because our comforts come on the backs and the blood of babies and individuals around the world. Us voting Kamala to stave off right-wing fascism in Tennessee and in the South.
First of all, fuck the South. Nobody gives a shit about those losers down there. Okay? Second of all, again, Hiram Rivera uses revolutionary language to set up his big Chinese grift.
At the expense of Palestinians, Yemenis, Puerto Ricans, Venezuelans, Cubans, the Congolese, and the land goes on and on and on, as she has pledged to build the fiercest military, quote unquote, in the world. And why do we need to build the fiercest military in the world? Because we are under the rule of monopoly capital and those tech bros who are taking us into this next phase of the world that we're in, and an economy that is completely tied to tech. And they have created, right, this feudal system that exists where nothing in the world global economy happens without going through Google, without going through some sort of Microsoft, without going through some sort of Zuckerberg. They've created a system, and the only counter to that is China. We're not going to get into debates around whether China is this or that or whatever. We just know for a fact, right, that the
Do we? Or do we know that China is the second largest trading partner of the Zionist entity? This motherfucker thinks he's slick. This dickhead thinks he's slick. He's trying to use revolutionary language to set up his big Chinese grift. What a dickhead. So, you want some facts about China, Hiram? And again, I'm Palestinian and Lebanese. I'm haplogroup L, which is a Palestinian and Lebanese haplogroup. Both my maternal grandparents were part Palestinian, part Lebanese. So this is China and the Zionist Entity by Ibrahim Ebed. It's from March 20, 2024. So In the early 70s of the past century, I was working at the PLO office attached to the United Nations. The late Sadat Hassan, who was the head of the office, and I were invited to the residence of the Chinese ambassador in his house, of course. Residence of the Chinese ambassador dinner in his house, of course. The ambassador was courteous and demonstrated his support to the legitimate struggle of Palestinians to liberate their homeland and establish this democratic secular state in historic Palestine. But in reality, the Chinese, like any other state in the world, built their relations with other states according to their interests and principles. We have observed the Chinese behavior in the Security Council when the matter concerns the Zionist entity. China, most of the time, abstains from condemning the Zionist entity. Refraining from criticizing means tolerating the criminal action towards Palestinians. The Zionist entity recognized China in the early 1950s, 2 years after its establishment, but the relations were lukewarm for a long time. Although China and the Zionist entity did not normalize their relations until 1992, the bilateral relationship has developed extensively, especially in the economic sphere. Starting in the early 2000s, ties between the entity and China, Zionist China, began to blossom mainly because the Chinese government started to view the Zionist entity as a global technology hub and began seeking to capitalize on the Zionist entity's innovation capabilities to help meet its own developmental needs and strategic changes. Since 1992, China and the Zionist entity have developed increasingly close economic, military, and technological ties. China became the Zionist entity's third largest trading partner globally and largest trading partner in East Asia. Bilateral trade volume increased from $50 million in 92 to over $10 billion in 2013. Already, Netanyahu has visited China 4 times, and the relationship with China has become stronger politically and economically, and all principles are gone. By 1979, however, China had begun to deal with the Zionist entity more pragmatically and less ideologically. This entailed the signing of deals to transfer Zionist defense technology to Beijing. In June 1990, the countries opened de facto embassies, the Zionist Entity Liaison Office, and the Zionist Entity Academy of Sciences and Humanities in Beijing, and the China International Travel Service Office in Jeddah. By January 1992, the countries had established full-fledged relations. Over the past 31 years, the China-Zionist entity economic relations have grown significantly. While bilateral trade stood at $50 million in 1992, it reached $22.8 billion in 2001, according to China's Bureau of Statistics. In 2021-2022, China replaced the USA as the Zionist entity's top source of imports, and the Zionist entity added China's currency, the renminbi, to its foreign reserves. The attitudes of China, Russia, and the United States are similar and identical, based on self-interest, profit, and gains. These unjust positions and constant continuation of genocide taught the resistant in Gaza a lesson not to depend on others to liberate Palestine. And the events in Gaza taught the world a lesson and revealed that the Zionist entity is a colonialist settler entity that must end and be replaced by a secular democratic state in all of historic Palestine. Any individual, establishment, or state that deals with the Zionist entity or befriends it is considered a partner of genocide in Palestine. So Chinaman Hiram there, he's no different than Gerald Horne. He is no different than Izzy Adesanya. He is a puppet of Zionist China. He is a puppet of Zionist China. Hiram Rivera, much like Mariano Rivera, is a puppet of Zionist China. You know, Zionist China, the country that normalizes the Zionist entity and, spread the COVID-19, aka the Kung Flu, around the world. The Chinese virus around the world. Hiram Rivera is a puppet of Zionist China. And, obviously, given that I'm Palestinian and Lebanese, I'm going to call him on it. Hiram Rivera. So why is Jared Ware platforming Hiram Rivera, who is a puppet of Zionist China. That's what Hiram Rivera is. He's like Izzy Adesanya. He's like Gerald Horn. He's like Rainier Shea. He is a puppet of Zionist China. Might as well give him the Chinese flag like Izzy Adesanya. You know what I mean? Or like Gerald Horn. So, Hiram Rivera has outed himself, much like Carl Jha. We'll put him on blast in a couple minutes. Maybe not a couple minutes. Maybe later this week. But Hiram Rivera, he is a puppet of Zionist China. Hiram Rivera is a puppet of Zionist China. China is now the second largest trading partner of the Zionist entity. It was third in 2021 to 2022. Hiram Rivera has outed himself as a puppet of Zionist China.